Under the neon glow of Joe Rogan's studio lights, the air was heavy with tension, the kind that only comes when two worlds collide, the raw brutality of boxing and the calculated spectacle of entertainment. Gervonta "Tank" Davis sat across from Rogan, his tone calm but his eyes sharp, a storm held barely in check. "This ain't entertainment no more," he said, voice low but cutting through the air like a blade. "This is personal." It wasn't a throwaway line or a marketing catchphrase. It was a warning, a message wrapped in steel and sent directly to Jake Paul. For Davis, this wasn't just another fight, it was a test of something deeper, his place in a sport that had started to feel more like a circus than an art. After his controversial draw with Lamont Roach Jr. earlier that year, whispers began circling that perhaps Tank had lost a step, that maybe the aura surrounding his name was beginning to fade. But Tank didn't flinch. He knew what people were saying, and he knew the fight with Jake Paul, spectacle or not, was a chance to reclaim something that mattered to him: respect. As the cameras rolled and Rogan pressed him on his mindset, Davis leaned forward. He wasn't dismissive, but he was deliberate. "I got to be in there with him," he said. "His arm reach, his size, his power. I just got to adapt." There was no trash talk, just intent. He spoke with the calm of a man who understood that chaos was coming, but that chaos was where he thrived. He'd fought through adversity before, in the ring, in life, and every time, he came out sharper. "Every time I fight," he added, "it's fireworks. Boxing wins come November 14th. That date had already become something of a line in the sand. On one side stood the old guard, the purists who saw the sport as sacred, who believed that matchups like this diluted its essence. On the other stood the new age, a crowd raised on spectacle, virality, and disruption. People who didn't care how many belts a man held, as long as he could make them feel something. Jake Paul had mastered that world. For years, Jake had been dismissed as an intruder, a YouTuber dabbling in a Warriors game. Yet, fight after fight, he kept winning. Maybe not everyone's respect, but definitely their attention. And in 2025, attention was the real currency. "I know how good Tank is," Paul admitted during his own interview segment. "This is my toughest test to date." He wasn't hiding behind his usual bravado this time. The tone was different, respectful, even vulnerable. "It's scary," he confessed. "It's kind of keeping me up at night." It was a strange admission for a man whose entire brand was built on fearlessness, but it made sense. He was stepping into the ring with one of the most explosive punchers of his generation. Gervonta Davis, despite being significantly smaller, carried the kind of power that rearranged careers. Yet Jake Paul's size advantage was undeniable. Nearly 30 pounds heavier, longer reach, bigger frame. In theory, he had every physical advantage. But boxing isn't theory. Boxing is timing, rhythm, psychology. And that's where Davis thrived. Still, the fight structure raised eyebrows. 10 3-minute rounds. 12-ounce gloves. Heavier than the standard Fight Night 8s Davis was used to. An exhibition, at least officially, though sanctioned judges would still score it. Even weirder? A body shot's only clause reportedly inserted to neutralize Davis's headshot power. Critics called it absurd. Some labeled it a freak show. But as absurdities go, this one was worth $50 million, Jake Paul's estimated purse, and that alone was enough to keep the cameras rolling. Rogan couldn't resist pressing Tank about the details, especially the weight gap. Davis's trainer had already voiced concerns. "We don't fight in 12-ounce gloves," he said flatly. "That's training gear." But Jake's camp refused any changes. "It's an exhibition," they said, "so it doesn't matter." To purists, that single phrase, "it doesn't matter," captured everything wrong with modern boxing. But to the promoters, it was gold. Netflix had secured the streaming rights, leaning hard into the chaos with a GTA-style promotional poster and a lineup of real title fights on the undercard to lend credibility. The marketing machine was relentless. Every clip, every face-off, every leaked sparring video turned into viral currency. Jake was winning before a single punch was thrown. In the midst of it, Tank faced another kind of scrutiny. Why this fight? Why now? Why not Shakur Stevenson, or a rematch with Lamont Roach? For his critics, it was proof that he'd become more businessman than boxer, chasing spectacle over legacy. For Tank, the answer was simpler. The payday was too big to ignore, and the spotlight too bright to turn down. If you can make a big payday, Go get that payday, former champion Shawn Porter said bluntly. Boxing don't love you. He wasn't wrong. Fighters had been chewed up and forgotten for over a century. The only constant was money. And in that sense, Jake Paul had changed the game, not by beating champions, but by making fighters rich. Porter admitted as much. People take Jake's fights for the money, not the respect, he said. But I can't knock it. You get in there, you get paid. Simple. Still, for many, this matchup represented something larger, a referendum on what boxing had become. If Jake Paul could survive against a fighter as refined and lethal as Gervonta Davis, it would prove that fame could indeed bend the sport to its will. But if Tank dismantled Jake, it would be a brutal reminder that boxing was still a craft, one you couldn't just buy your way into. Wade Plemons, a prominent boxing commentator, put it best: Jake doesn't just fight opponents, he fights narratives. Every insult, every press conference, every stage scuffle was another chess move. He'd turned marketing into psychological warfare, baiting Davis into a fight that was as much about global attention as it was about boxing. Jake set the trap, Wade said. He dangled fame, fortune, and legacy. And Tank couldn't walk away. But the trap went both ways. Davis wasn't the kind of fighter who could be outmaneuvered easily. He'd built his reputation on reading patterns, dissecting opponents, and exploding with precision. Against taller fighters, he'd made careers vanish in seconds. As one analyst noted, feet before fists, timing before muscle, discipline before clout. That was Tank's creed: patience, pressure, punishment. And so the storylines began to collide: the purist versus the showman, the ring technician versus the viral sensation. Even within boxing circles, the debate was vicious. Promoters like Eddie Hearn called it a freak show, a sideshow masquerading as a sporting event. But others pointed to the numbers. Millions of new eyes on boxing. Massive purses for fighters who'd otherwise be scraping for relevance. You can hate it, Hearn said, but you can't ignore it. It's not boxing, but it sells. Somewhere between the criticism and the hype, though, the fight began to mean something more. It became a mirror reflecting the sport's identity crisis. What did boxing want to be? A discipline rooted in purity and respect, or a billion-dollar spectacle built for algorithms and attention spans? The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the middle. As the date drew near, even Tank's harshest critics admitted they'd be watching. Curiosity had replaced outrage. Could a YouTuber truly survive 10 rounds with a pound-for-pound great? Could Tank, fighting under heavier gloves and stricter rules, deliver the kind of fireworks he promised? It was impossible to know. But that uncertainty, that tension, was the point. In training footage, Paul looked leaner, faster. He'd brought in world champions like Shakur Stevenson and Montana Love to help him mimic Tank's speed and rhythm. He even confessed to cutting muscle to improve mobility. "We're focusing on speed," he said, "not power." It was an unexpected shift, the influencer known for brute strength now chasing finesse. Davis, meanwhile, was all business. He barely spoke, spending most of his camp in quiet repetition, sparring smaller men who moved like ghosts. To him, this wasn't an exhibition. It was an exorcism. Every shadow of doubt, every headline questioning his discipline, he planned to silence it all in that ring. And yet, the risk was undeniable. If Jake Paul won, even by decision, the sport's hierarchy would collapse overnight. Influencer boxing would no longer be a sideshow. It would be the show. Rankings, belts, legacies, all would take a back seat to viewership and spectacle. But if Tank won decisively, the message would be clear: clout can't replace craft. So as November 14th approaches, both men stand on opposite sides of the same coin. One fighting to prove he belongs, the other fighting to prove he's still untouchable. The cameras will flash, the crowd will roar, and the algorithms will feast. But when that first bell rings, all the noise will fade. It won't be YouTuber versus boxer anymore. It'll be man versus man, skill versus will. And when the final bell sounds, no matter who's standing, the sport of boxing will have changed, again. Who do you think comes out on top? Does Jake Paul shock the world? Or does Gervonta Davis remind everyone why skill still reigns supreme? Drop your thoughts below. And if you love deep dives like this into boxing's biggest showdowns, make sure to like, subscribe, and join the conversation. The fight's just getting started.